to go skim the Wittgenstein and Qualia paper. Man, that brings back a lot of memories. So that'll help put this in context. I should have read NetBlock's response too. Maybe I'll get to that. But okay, so where were we here? This is, I think, right where we were.
So it's really ended up being half on Bloch and half on McDowell. So this first section, I'll read the section titles because I think to help to orient you, especially since there's no PowerPoint. The first section is called, Is Sameness Well Defined in the Case of Qualia? Bloch's paper, Wittgenstein and Qualia, did not immediately convince me, however. One of its theses I had already accepted, namely that the view, which I called externalism in the threefold chord, mind, body, and world, and by this particular use of externalism I avoid now because I have a different use of externalism in philosophy of language, semantic externalism. And so I very rarely, but in mind, body, I refer to the view which is held both by disjunctivists and by some intentionalists, two big schools in philosophy of perception, that you can describe the subjective character of a veridical perceptual experience completely by just describing the objective perceptible properties of the thing or things you're looking at. So if I'm looking, Mike Martin likes to use a white picket fence in a paper called On Non-Being Alienated. So if you're looking at a white picket fence, to describe the subjective quality of that visual impression, it suffices to describe the objective color, etc., of the picket fence, or at least the objective color as from that point in space.
Yeah. So in fact, this is interesting because in the Bloch paper, what Bloch is trying to establish in that paper is the idea of some kind of inverted spectrum, that your red could be by green or something along those lines, even though that would be a general shift in what Bloch was in the mental qualities that one has, like the what is likeness properties, even if you could shift that even with all the intentional saying everything looks this way, stays the same. So the intentionality business that he mentioned there, the representationalists, basically that's what they've been called. Intentionalism is the view that all there is to sensory experience is representing something as being a certain way. So the thing doesn't need to be in the environment. There doesn't need to be an apple with any redness. There just needs to be a representation of an apple and some redness. And that's a big debate in the philosophy of perception. So wait, what did he...
Color, etc., of the picket fence, or at least the objective color as from that.
So yeah, and that was part of Bloch's thesis in that paper, was that there's an aspect of the experience, the qualitative aspect, according to Bloch, which cannot be captured by any appeal to something in language, or it's truly ineffable in some sense. It's in Bloch's term, you can refer to it, but you can't, there's no language that's going to describe it. And so what Bloch's trying to establish is that in these inverted cases, what shifted is the thing that can't be described, because everything that you can describe is staying the same in sense. So what is Putnam's response here? Hold on, let me go back here.
Impression, it suffices to describe the objective color, etc., of the picket fence, or at least the objective color as...
Right, and so this view would be like associated with what's called the transparency of experience, whereby you are, whereby, to become aware of the redness of the apple, one focuses on the apple. I've always found that very convincing. When you want to know about the redness of the apple, you look at the apple. That's where the redness is. So I certainly agree this is the way things seem. So now, Bloch does spend a lot of time in this paper trying to establish that there's at least within a person, within a same individual, a sense in which it makes sense to say, we can do these kind of comparisons. Putnam just said he wants to challenge this idea of phenomenal similarity. Is that what? Interesting. Okay.
from that point in space. The objective look, so to speak, where the objective look is something that can be photographed, not so these two schools, although they clash violently on other things, intentionalism and disjunctivism, both take what they call the transparency of perception to a really far out extreme. Perception is so transparent that in the case of veridical experience, they have different stories about hallucination, but in the case of veridical experience, they both insist what you see are the properties of the thing itself. It really is, deserves the term naive realism. Now, I had already accepted, before I heard Bloch's talk, one of the theses of that Bloch defends, namely that this extreme externalism is wrong.
Right, and so Bloch is arguing this extreme externalism is wrong because you could shift the contents of experience, so not the intentional contents. Maybe not even all of the representational contents, if these qualitative things are representational in any sense, which I think Bloch admits, although that's not what their essence is, that they do represent things, phenomenally represent. Okay, so he already accepted this kind of phenomenal externalism was incorrect. Okay, interesting.
You cannot describe the phenomenological character of a veridical perceptual experience, say the experience of someone has when seeing a white cat on a blue sofa, just by exhaustively describing the relevant observable properties of the presented scene in the usual public language. That is, describing the shade of blue of the sofa, the kind of white in the case of the cat, etc., the kind of lighting, the distance you are from the sofa. Describing all those things is not to give a complete description of the phenomenological character of your visual experience. I've long maintained that the way the color of something appears to a subject depends on the properties of the perceiving subject as well as on the properties of the something in question.
Right, and this, I think, did I mention this in the previous video we were talking about naive realism? This has been a trend in like more contemporary versions of naive realism to try to introduce some sense in which, even though the properties of redness and so forth are external and in the world, and we become aware of them in some direct way, there may be some further aspects of what it's like, or the conscious experience, phenomenal character, whatever you want to call it, which the mind contributes or layers on top of the stuff that's already out there in the world. It's an interesting view. So, okay, so Putnam is maybe partially an inspiration for this kind of resurgence of an idea. I hadn't thought of that. Okay.
As a young man, and I maintain that because of an experience I had already as a quite young man. As a young man, I think this was at Atlantic City probably, I noticed that when I would lie on a beach with one eye shut, as would occasionally happen when one side of my face was on the sand, and so I would close that eye, the beach, the color of the beach looked a slightly less intense shade of yellow if the left eye was open and if the right eye was the open eye. But I wouldn't have said that the beach appeared to be yellow when viewed with my left eye alone, and that it appeared to be gray when viewed through my right eye alone. The difference was not that extreme. And I wouldn't have affected my matching performance on a color chart. Suppose I had a chart with all the different objective shades of yellow, labeled yellow 1, yellow 2, and so on. If the beach seemed to me to match yellow 32 when I look at both the color chart and the beach with my left eye open, it would also seem to match yellow 32 when I look at the color chart and the beach with just my right eye open. It's the subjective appearance of the objective color that is different. The difference between these...
Yeah, and you could see like there's difference in the amount of receptors in each eye. I don't know, does that check for me? I don't really get that, to be honest. things do look slightly different, like on one side or something like that. But okay, so this gets us into all these interesting questions that were in Block's paper about the way we say that something looks red, and this other thing that we're talking about, the qualitative mental property, and how they're related to each other and how you might switch one versus the other. So if you have me looking at a ripe strawberry, I say it looks red and I experience phenomenal redness. In Block's example, if I undergo a few years later some kind of inversion where things that are red now produce in me the experience, the phenomenal greenness, then we can say that red things look green. This is the way Block would put it. Red things look green because the strawberry is red, but it's my experience that's been switched. So it looks green. It's keyed to the way something looks, according to Block, is not tracking what's physical property the thing has when we say it looks green, looks red, but the qualitative thing. But on the other hand, wait, didn't he? So we could also say that this thing, it appears, it looks white, but it looks pink, but is white, like with a red light. Yeah, okay, so the way that it looks tracks the subjective thing, not the physical thing. Okay, interesting. And so what Putnam is here saying is that the difference between his two eyes is slightly different, but not in a color inversion sort of way, but there's something phenomenologically different between the two cases, even though they represent all the same stuff, one might think. And this maybe is what partially inspired like stuff like Block's argument using Marissa Carrasco's attention experiments and stuff, where you have, representations of the same allegedly physical stimulus and then differences between how the stimuli appear. Interesting. Okay, so Putnam is using this as an argument against this form of representationalism or extreme transparency. Interesting. Okay.
Experiences is ineffable in Block's sense. That is, Block is not, by ineffable, Block doesn't mean impossible in principle to describe. Maybe you could describe it using some scientific language or some scientific theory, but it's not describable in ordinary public language, ordinary public color talk.
Yeah, the way Block put it is there's no color name where you could say this is the way things look. Okay.
But it's not inexplicable, as Block mentions. This phenomenon is easily accounted for by the difference in, and he refers to me as the one who pointed his attention to it, but it's accounted for by the difference in the maculae of the two eye. The maculae of my left eye and by the way, everyone else I've had talked to and had try the experiment, say, of looking at a surface, say outside, looking at a white wall, say 20 or 30, far enough away from you so you can't account for the difference by parallax. You look at it, say a white wall or a yellow wall, a uniformly colored wall, with your left eye open, your right eye open, and just everybody will report that the subjective appearance of the color is a little different. And you can't say, well, the real color is the color it would appear to have to someone with a normal macula, because both my right eye, the macula of my right eye and my macula of my left eye are in the normal range. It's not even an abnormality. But to ask, is the shade of the sand really the shade it looks to your left eye, or the shade it looks to your right eye, is meaningless. So there is such a thing.
I mean, I don't get the difference in the color thing. I'm looking at the wall over there. There is a phenomenological difference, I would say. Things look like a little more over there versus a little more over there. But interesting.
I agree with the program of trying to say what was right in naive realism, or in what I'd prefer James' expression, the natural realism of the common man. Yes, we should try to say what was right in that, but there's such a thing as going too far in the direction of naive realism. However, at the Dublin conference, I still rejected the idea, which is central to Bloch's defense of Qualia talk against Wittgensteinians, that the relation of sameness of qualitative character could be fixed by finding out which brain states Qualia correspond to, or which brain states they are.
And that's what Bloch's strategy is. They use a kind of weak supervenience claim that whenever there's an experience of type A, there's going to be a brain state of type A prime, and whenever there's a change in experience, there's going to be a change in the brain state. So we can at least, so whatever relationship they have in reality, you can at least see a kind of mapping according to Bloch between these things, so that we can look at so there's no kind of undetectable quality inversion here according to Bloch. You don't need that. Okay.
There I said, quotes, this is in the discussion, but that discussion will be published shortly because those papers are finally coming out in a volume that Maria Begramian is editing. I said, quotes, now Bloch's paper certainly suggests that some straightforward identification of qualia with certain brain states is going to be discovered. But if there were such an identification, maybe I should have said if there were such an identity, knowing which one it is probably an unsolvable epistemological problem. And I give an argument that it would be, that if there were brain state qualia identity, it would be epistemologically unknowable. I give an argument to that effect in the mind-brain chapter of Reason, Truth, and History, gave. Now, and I could also have referred to the threefold chord, mind, body, and world, because in that book, although that book rejected the internal realism that I defended in Reason, Truth, and History, it also rejected Qualia talk on the grounds that sameness and difference of subjective experiences is something for which there are only ordinary language criteria. In other words, I defended the view that if a fully competent speaker of the language says her experience was the same on 2 occasions, then other things being equal, that counts as it's being the same.
Okay, so Bloch addresses this in that Wittgenstein paper. No, he doesn't attribute to Putnam, does he? But he does address this view. Okay.
The question as to whether the experiences of different people, or even one person at different times, are really the same, when there's no basis for doubt in the ordinary use of the expression same experience, could, I claimed, not be scientifically investigated. There is, as I put it, no well-defined relation of phenomenological sameness there for science to investigate. This claim of mine, that qualitative sameness, supposing there is such a thing, would be epistemologically inaccessible, was directly rebutted by Bloch in the second of the 2 papers to which I referred above, the one on the mesh between neuroscience and phenomenology and philosophy of perception.
Exactly.
It's worth our time to review the issues at stake. Here's what a part of what I said in Dublin after Bloch delivered the first of the 2 papers, Wittgenstein and Qualia. I already quoted the first sentence. But if there were such an identification of qualia with brain states, knowing which one it is a probably unsolvable epistemological problem. I think we should give up the assumption, this is the view I'm no longer, Bloch talked me out of. I think we should give up the assumption that sameness of qualitative character is well defined, even for one person at different times, or different people at the same time, let alone for non-conspecifics. Even Bloch thinks it's problematic for non-conspecifics, say for a mammal and a fish. I don't think there is a fact of the matter, albeit an ineffable one, about whether the qualitative character is the same or different in such cases. I think we should give that assumption up. I think there are no good candidates in present-day neurology for a relation of identity of qualitative character. If it seems strange that one can be wrong about there being a well-defined relation of identity here, an example from the history of science may help, I said. It naturally seems to us that there's a fact of the matter about what's happening somewhere 10 light years from here right now. When my kids were small,
no,
and
there's no such thing as now. Okay, so there still is like a time slice. You can cut it different ways, so there's no objective answer in the sense there's no one unique answer. There is an objective answer. It's just that it's going to be more finely grained slice depending on what is now. Is that where this is? Okay, so hold on.
there were comic books lying around the house, Superman comic books. I know how often you were told exactly what was happening in some galaxy 10 light years away, or 100 light years away, as if there is a fact of the matter as to what is 10 light years, what is now 10 light years away. But after special relativity, we've had to abandon that natural belief. We've learned that right now is not well defined when astronomical distances or high relative velocities are involved. Similarly, it may be that identical phenomenal quality is not well defined.
Yeah, but is well defined in the sense that within the same frame of reference, you can define it. But it's not well defined in the sense that there's no unique series A1, A2, A3, which describes all the nows or whatever. So you can arrange them different ways depending on how, persons in different frames of reference can arrange them in different ways. Okay, so great, but does that mean it's not objective? It means within the same frame of reference, and there's ways of translating between them. That's all objective transformations. Anyway, so I kind of get the point, though, that there may be lots of ways of slicing up the similarity relations between you and the fish and so forth. Okay.
Nagel's famous question, is the bat's phenomenal experience the same as mine or not, may be meaningless as what is happening on the sun this second. At this
Nagel used bats though because they're mammals, and mammals are creatures in a way similar to us. And part of his idea was that there's a kind of similarity space between, like, humans at least, as meaningless as what's happening on the sun right this second. Interesting. I find that really a challenging view, obviously. Just does seem like there's a question. Is what the bat experiences like what I call vision, or is it like what I call hearing, or something else? How could that question be meaningless? Okay. Challenge.
point, I gave the following argument in support of the idea that the supposed relation of identity of phenomenal character of experiences of one subject at different times is, if it exists at all, epistemologically inaccessible. Gerald Edelman once invited me to spend a day in his laboratory. In the course of that fascinating visit, he said that when we visualize, say, a colored sheet of paper, part of what happens is that part of the visual cortex that was active when the original experience occurred is reactivated. Suppose that the recognition of patterns, thinking of shades of colors as a species of pattern, is modularized. Edelman also told me that pattern recognition modules tend to recruit additional neurons if they're frequently stimulated, and to lose neurons to adjacent modules if unused compared to the adjacent modules. Consider the speculation that the slightest change, say the loss or gain of a single neuron, changes the quale. Could the subject tell? In philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein wrote, quotes, always get rid of the idea, this is in page 207 of part 2 of philosophical investigations. Always get rid of the idea of a private object in this way. Wittgenstein's proposed therapy. Always get rid of the idea of a private object in this way. Assume that it constantly changes, but that you do not notice the changes because your memory constantly deceives you. What Edelman told me suggested
It constantly changes, but your memory fails. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. You can. So suppose I'm looking at the red pen. It's switching between red, green, blue, orange, yellow, purple, black. But each fraction of a second, I'm also forgetting. And so I just have a memory of it being in red. Okay. How is that supposed to get rid of this private? I mean, I'm not very moved by these kind of skeptical considerations. I sort of feel like we don't have much reason to take them serious. How is this supposed to get rid of the idea of an internal? I mean, first of all, I don't accept that phenomenal consciousness involves internal objects. I am more friendly to the idea of the notion of a qualia than I think your average person, maybe. Okay, so I don't see how this is going to get rid of that.
To me that if the changes Edelman described did cause a change in the qualia we supposedly have when a given module is stimulated, we would never know, because when we had tried to remember how the sheet of paper or whatever looked before the neurons were added or subtracted from the module, the memory image would seem as if there were no change in the quality. It's exactly, in other words, that Wittgenstein's thought experiment is actually occurring all the time.
Wait, say that again?
Exactly, in other words, that Wittgenstein from the module, the memory image would seem as if there were no change in the quality. It's exactly, in other words, that Wittgenstein's thought experiment is actually occurring all the time.
Why? Because you have the neurons. These are red, so you have -1. It's a different concept. So how is this related to? I must have missed something. Let's go back.
Quotes, always get rid of the idea, this is in page 2,
Okay, hold on.
pattern recognition modules tend to recruit additional neurons if they're frequently stimulated, and to lose neurons to adjacent modules if unused compared to the adjacent modules. Consider the speculation that the slightest change, say the loss or gain of a single neuron, changes the quale. Could the subject tell? In philosophical investigations,
Could the subject tell? So first of all, that's very speculative, but could the subject tell? What's the argument that they couldn't tell?
Wittgenstein wrote, quotes, always get rid of the idea, this is in page 207 of part 2 of philosophical investigations. This way, Wittgenstein's proposed therapy. Always get rid of the idea of a private object in this way. Assume that it constantly changes, but that you do not notice the changes. Edelman typed did cause a change in the qualia. To me that if the changes Edelman, what Edelman told me, suggested to me that if the changes Edelman described did cause a change in the qualia we supposedly have when a given module is stimulated, we would never know, because when we had tried to remember how the sheet of paper or whatever looked before the neurons were added or subtracted from the module, the memory image would seem as if there were no change in the quality.
Yeah, so this, since we're all just assuming anything we want, we can make other assumptions too. So, for example, suppose that you're looking at the red before the change has 5 neurons. Just okay. Then it recruits another one. Boom, there's 6. So now the experience of the red changes because by some stipulative assumption, we assume that's what happens. Okay, great. So now you want to remember, you have the 6 neurons. Well, you want to remember what it looked like before. Putnam seems to be assuming that those 6 neurons are going to be activated because that's what, that's what it is to see red now. And then when you try to remember it, it'll be like, was it like this? And well, there's no way for you to compare it to what it was before. But how do we not know that when you compare it, you don't activate the 5 neurons instead of the 6? That you can recall that earlier state. It doesn't seem like there's an argument that's given against that view. So therefore, no empirical reason to think that this has actually happened as far as I know. But I guess I just generally am not moved by this, like, this kind of style of argument where you get to speculate and draw conclusions. But that may be just me. I don't know. Okay, let's continue though.
Exactly, in other words, that Wittgenstein's thought experiment is actually occurring all the time. Memories would change as the correlated qualia changed. And this shows that at the very least the supposed sameness or difference of qualia is epistemologically inaccessible, and perhaps at the very idea that there is such a relation of really being the same, as distinct from the relation of seeming the same as far as I can tell now by relying on my memory and my mastery of the language, is as much of a mistake as supposing that there's such a relation as really happening this very second on the sun, as opposed to happening this second in a given reference frame. Wittgenstein's and Edelman's remarks seem to fit together like hand and glove. Now, the next section is titled Problems with My Argument Against Qualia. Obviously, I took a remark of Edelman's and ran with it, and I probably ran further than he would approve. To conclude from the experiment with a colored sheet of paper he described that we can never remember what our experiences were like prior to changes in the visual cortex, as I did, was a big inferential leap. If someone becomes red-green colorblind as a result of brain damage, is it really the same case that she will not be able to remember what red and green objects used to look like? That's certainly not something I know, but there were fatal problems with my argument beyond the uncertainty of the empirical premise I assumed. Even if its premise were correct, that would show only that if a subject's spectrum became shifted as a result of changes in her visual cortex, she would not be aware of it, and hence others could not confirm the shift on the basis of her reports. In Consciousness, Accessibility, and the Mesh Between Psychology and Neuroscience, Bloch argues that identification of the brain parameters responsible for qualia need not depend simply on subjects' reports. In general, mind-brain connections have to be confirmed by arguments from the consilience of a hypothesis with different kinds of evidence rather than from direct tests, familiar from present-day physics as well.
By the way, this is something that's been super influential in my own thinking, so this is why I think this paper is so very interesting and important, this mesh paper, for precisely these reasons. Okay. Cool.
From present-day physics, for example, as well as from a comparison of the explanatory power or lack thereof of various alternative hypotheses, as is common in other sciences. In Consciousness, Accessibility, and the Mesh Between Psychology and Neuroscience, Bloch outlines how such an approach is likely to go in the case of visual phenomenology. On studying that paper, I was completely convinced. As a byproduct of reading that paper, I was also...
By the way, I would just mention, this is, since we brought up this Festriff over here, which is now just sitting here, this one, the Hawkwan Lao paper I mentioned with that I co-wrote with him, part of our argument was to say we agree with Bloch's methodology, but it's too early to say that it favors one theory of consciousness or another. And in fact, there are kind of multiple meshes that you could see forming right now, meshes between the psychology, neuroscience, interpreted from a first order perspective, and a mesh interpreted from a higher order perspective. And so we were kind of trying to argue that the better mesh is that one. I think the debate is complicated, but I certainly agree that this is our best hope of trying to get out of it. Okay, so
enabled to see what was wrong with a key argument in J.M. Hinton's classic paper, Visual Experiences, the foundational paper for what is today called disjunctivism. An argument of Hinton's that I had long found fishy. Hinton scoffs at the idea that someone has experiences which are the same when she has a hallucination and when she has a corresponding, indistinguishable by her, visual experience.
really,
And of course, that's the shocking, counterintuitive claim of disjunctivism. That is to say that even a perfect hallucination, say when, and a corresponding visual experience do not have such things as common, there are no common sense data or common qualia. They're just indistinguishable. But to say they're indistinguishable because the sense data are the same or because the qualia are the same is just a mistake. There are no such things as qualia or sense data.
is that the way I would put disjunctivism? I mean, there's something in common which between them, but there's no qualia in the sense of the object having the property. Okay.
Call such a common factor, Hinton says, let's suppose there were such a common factor, a common phenomenal factor, and call it her psiing, using the Greek letter psi, her psiing on both occasions. We could not find out what psiing is by empirical investigation. In other words, there couldn't be an identity theory, a physicalist identity theory, that the relation of psiing is such and such a physical relation, counting neurology as part of physics. Hinton argues because we would first have to be clear on what psiing is. His picture is clearly that an empirical identity, say A's are really B's, can only be confirmed if one is totally clear in advance on what one means by A's. Here's the passage in the Hinton paper, Visual Experiences. Quotes, if there is no such thing as Q, the supposed common as the supposed common factor, then there is of course no such thing as my psiing for the following statements to be about. 1. My psiing is one and the same event as some happening that is describable in the language of physics and or physiology, including neurophysiology. The problem with Hinton's argument, in a nutshell, is that when an identity, A's are really B's, is a matter of theory. For example, say gravitational attraction is really a tidal force, that is a deformation of space-time, rather than a simple observational report like that man is my son. Becoming clear on what A means, what we mean by gravitational attraction, and confirming the claimed identity as the best explanation via the consilience of various lines of data, the fact that it has the highest explanatory power of all the proposed explanations and the like, proceeds simultaneously. Becoming clear on what A's are and becoming clear and determining what the best identity theory is proceeds simultaneously. One does not come before the other. If qualia will be successfully identified with brain states, then we can expect to become clear on not exactly what we mean by qualia, but on what we ought to mean by the term. What we mean by water today is in fact not exactly what we meant before we discovered the chemistry of water. For Locke, ice and water were two different substances, albeit one frequently turned into the other. One of the reasons British atomists believe that alchemy should not be theoretically impossible is that, after all, we do see one substance turn into a different substance whenever water freezes or ice melts.
Does Locke say that? Where does Locke say that? I know he has all kinds of things that he says about the hidden essence and stuff, but does he really say ice is a different substance than water? Wow. Okay, I'll have to look at it.
In 1967, Oxford Ordinary Language, which is when Hinton's paper was published, Oxford Ordinary Language philosophy was still riding high. The argument of Hinton's that I just quoted represents the weak side of that profoundly scientifically unsophisticated school. And the next section is called Naive Realism.
Why did they zoom out there? Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, geez. Okay, so this is just getting interesting, but unfortunately, we got to stop here. This seems like this pulling away, drawing me. No, I want to come back to Putnam. Okay, I'm a clown. Yes. Hello. Yuckles the clown at your service. I'll be back.